Mantyk is here with us. Is here with us as well, and he's asked me to say to you, would you mute yourself until it's your turn to speak, or till we invite people to say something, unless you are actually going to be one of the readers of the poetry. So that would actually avoid feedback noises coming down the line. So that would be really good. So excellent. There's also a facility at the bottom there, a chat facility, so you can leave messages, and certainly Evan's on the technical front here to help out. So if there's something happening, he will pick up your message immediately. I might not pick it up immediately because I'm burbling on, but he will pick it up and we'll see if we can sort out the problem. So welcome to all of you. This is the summer and the 4th poetry Zoom of the Classical Poetry Society. I say this, I've said it before, but there's some new people here today. This is the world's premier organization for promoting and distributing classical poetry, that is to say formal poetry. And for the avoidance of doubt, as I like to say, formal poetry means this is poetry that utilizes form, stanzaic, metrical, alliterative, or rhyme-based techniques in it. In other words, it is poetry that is not indistinguishable from prose. In other words, so much modern poetry is really just prose. The Society of Classical Poets is actually promoting stuff which is not. And each of these Zoom readings, this is the 4th one, has had a theme. We've had winners from the past, we've celebrated Christmas from the past, and today we are actually celebrating 2 things really. We're celebrating 4 winning poets from the Society of Classical Poets' own competition for 2022. And at the same time, we're also celebrating 4 winners, are actually technically 3 plus 1. I'll explain what the 1 means in a minute, from the Dante 100 competition, which was co-hosted by the Society of Classical Poets. And thematically, I am trying to bring together themes that are classical and or mythological. So I'd like you to hope and think that what we've got is a fantastic menu of some really interesting poems in classical form with this mythological kind of dimension to it. And it's great for me because I'm about to meet some people I haven't met before because of the Dante 100 competition, and that's very, very exciting. So we've got 4 poets in each of those 2 categories, i.e. the SCP winners and the Dante 100 winners, but we have 4 poets present who are reading their own poems, and the other 4 winning poems will be read by guests, readers that I've invited to read their poems for them because for some reason or another, they couldn't be here. So I hope that's clear. And with that in mind, I think we ought to get onto the real deal, the real meal, the real meat that we're all looking for, which are the poets and the poems themselves. And so I'd like to introduce you to a poet I've actually been admiring for quite a long while, Cynthia Erlandson. She regularly pops up in the Society of Classical Poets pages. She's had another poem published very, very recently. She was a winning poet in the competition for 2022. She is a poet and fitness professional. I like that. I love those kind of strange things where people are, you know, people with me, I'm a management consultant and a poet. Well, how can you be that? Oh, I'm a fitness professional and a poet, lives in Michigan. She's had 2 collections of poems out, and they're both published by Author House. So her first one was called Holy Mysteries. And she's also got the book of, is it actually a book called the Book of Common Praise Hymnal, or is that actually a?
It's an actual hymnal. It's an actual hymnal. It has 4 of my texts in it.
Right. Okay. Well, you actually had a fabulous winning poem called Easter Monday, Cynthia. So could you tell us a little bit about the form of your poem?
Sure. That's an interesting question for this poem. It's in my first book, These Holy Mysteries, and the first version of this was actually, this is a very old poem. I used to think I should try to write in free verse once in a while. So the first version of this is in free verse. It's also in the book, but I'm much happier with the one that is not free verse. It is a very simple rhyme scheme. Night and light overlap in the first and second verses because that's the major imagery. And there's 3-4 line stanzas. And so it kind of came, it wasn't very challenging because it just kind of presented itself to me as a simple form that seemed
Yeah,
right.
okay. Well, actually, I thought actually you were going to say it was challenging because you had it in an earlier form. In other words, because it was in free verse at one point, and you actually translated it into this form, which seems to work so well. I wonder whether that had been a challenge. And obviously you had some core ideas, and then you suddenly thought about it, and you thought, you know what, this would be more powerful in this other form. But I mean, maybe it came quite naturally to you. It sort of it came into place, or was there a particular challenge that you had at that point?
It really wasn't very challenging. It's an iambic pentameter, which sometimes I find it almost harder not to write an iambic pentameter. So the meter was pretty easy, and the rhyme scheme was, like I said, it was simple. It just seemed to make sense to me.
Okay, then. Well, let's hear it from you. So Easter Monday, Cynthia Erlandson, over to you.
Okay, thank you. This is based on the story in St. Luke chapter 24. With hearts eclipsed by Friday's three-day night, and eyes still blinded to their master's face, they hear his sermon, senseless that his light has thrown the flames of hell to dark disgrace. The evening sun begins to set its fire, their hearts to burn, the longing Lenten night to roll away, and dawning of desire to rise, lit by a death-defying light. His broken hands break bread in sacred rite. Their sudden vision flares to brightest mirth. Their blindness gone, he vanishes from sight, and they, with fiery hearts, will light the earth.
Wonderful. Wonderful poem. I really like that a lot. There's so much in it that one could talk about, but I can't. I've got other people to talk to, Cynthia. I've got to move on. But tell me, what's your favorite line in that poem?
My favorite line is, their blindness gone, he vanishes from sight.
Yes.
Because it just gets to the paradoxical nature of the way St. Luke told the story and what actually happened.
Yes. So that's sort of sudden revolution. My own favorite line, actually, there's a lot of favorite lines, to be honest with you. I mean, the last line is wonderful, but my actual favorite line, I think, is with hearts eclipsed by Friday's three-day night. I mean, it's an opening line. It's almost got a Dunnian quality. You batter my heart, three-person God. It's the sort of, oh yeah, three-person God. Friday's three-day night has got that sort of immediately arrested my attention. You don't normally think of a three-day night. It's a sort of oxymoron, a day night. It's a wonderful verbal construction. I think very impressive piece of work. I love that very, very much indeed, and it's a worthy winning poet. So congratulations to you, and thank you for reading that to us. That's
thank
really
you very
fabulous.
much.
Well, I'm now going to move on to another winning poet from the SCP competition, which I strongly advise everyone to enter every year because it's such a great competition. And that is Cheryl Corrie. Now, Cheryl couldn't be here today to be with us, but her poem, Three Sisters, is based on the Greek story of the three fatal sisters, or the three sisters of fate. And this, again, is another fabulous poem. But I asked her some questions, and here are her replies to my questions that I asked her. She says, my goal was to write 3 poems in sonnet-like form, with 1 poem dedicated to each fate. But I wanted each poem to stand on its own as well. And by the way, she's certainly done that. I would say that the greatest challenge was probing my own imagination. My intention was to give each of the fates their own distinctive voice. So I treated each poem as its own little novelette. I asked myself, what would this character say or think? And how might they interact with each other? Might there even be a bit of sibling rivalry? I don't have a favorite line per se, but my favorite couplet is from Lachesis. And notwithstanding every life's a treasure, as Clotho spins, so you will take the measure. I like the way it flows and sounds, and how a poem sounds is very important to me. I always recite a poem aloud during composition. I love those little details, don't you? I mean, do you recite a poem aloud during composition or not? I mean, you know, and if you've never done that, it's all something worth trying to do, because sound is very important. It's where the emotional content comes. She adds, actually, I can't resist saying this because Evan's here, I don't want to be a creep, but I'll say it. She says, I would say that SCP, Society of Classical Poets, is one of, if not the premier forums for those of us who continue to write classical formal verse, and the feedback is wonderful. Well, that's so nice. Now, I've got somebody very special to read the Three Sisters. I've got my own dearly beloved son, Joseph Sale, who is a poet, who is a novelist, a quite successful novelist, and he also runs an elite writing forum on something called Patreon. And there's a lot of free material. There's also subscription stuff that he offers. So if you're interested in writing novels and writing generally, epic generally, and you want some ideas, just email me or put up on the chat that you'd be interested in more details about that. But Joe does this and he's really good at it. I would say that I'm his father, but actually he is really good at it. And he's really good at reading poems. So Joe, I don't want you to let me down now. I've said you're really good at reading poems. Your opportunity now.
Fantastic. Well, thank you everyone for having me. It's a real honor and a pleasure. And actually the Three Sisters is a topic of particular interest to me. So it's almost as if there was the hands of the fates was involved in this decision. It's a fabulous poem and I will do my best with the many Greek words within it. Three sisters, Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos. Clotho. When mother sat me down, I feared the worst. Her words, however, offered praise instead. Your gentle hands are motherly, she said. That's why I've chosen you to be the first of three, the fates, henceforth to spin the thread of life. I sit before the spinning wheel, and every thread I spin with zeal to make my mother proud. The sheep are led to shearing, wool is carded, wash. I feel the texture, baby soft, and then there's silk from spun cocoons. To me, that's mother's milk. I hold the world within my hands, reveal the birthing child as either girl or boy, and every thread's a life that brings me joy. Lachesis. We sisters three, the fates, as progeny of Themis, she who counsels Jove, are bound by laws of gods, not men. Your mind is sound, your instinct good, responsibility is yours to render judgment as to death, and notwithstanding every life's a treasure, as Clotho spins, so you will take the measure. The moment they will draw their final breath, my mother's words were like a smithy's weight, but inner strength was always my cuirass, my oath to meet and hopefully surpass all expectation, prove there's more to fate than happenstance, and so as law demands, I hold a thread of life between my hands. Atropos. I cut the thread of life as Lachesis commands, yet I'm the sister hated most, while Clotho, always pale, is like a ghost, but plays a sweetheart role, our darling sis. I often feel that mine's a thankless job. It calls for perfect vision, nerves of steel and steady hands, no matter what I feel. I mustn't let them see or hear me sob. Instead, I focus on the tools of trade. My newest toy, a laser, cleanly cuts. But if I'm off a hair, I get tut-tuts. I also have a special scalpel made of black obsidian found on isles of Greece. To all the lives I end, rest in peace.
You know, that is a brilliant poem, isn't it? Absolutely brilliant. I mean, actually, what's so many clever things in it. I mean, it's the ancientness of it, and yet all that contemporary language like happenstance and having a laser. Did you have a favorite line in it, Joe? It's not your poem, I know, but did you have a favorite line in that poem?
I did actually. I sit before the spinning wheel, and every thread I spin with zeal. I think that is a fantastic rhyme, and the line seems to spin. It seems to unfurl itself as it moves. So.
Yeah, it's almost onomatopoeic in the sense of life wants to be born, doesn't it? It urgently comes into existence, and it's very, very exciting. I actually like, but if I'm off a hair, I get tut-tuts. That is a kind of, it's a sponde masquerading as an iambic foot, and it's just wonderful. Okay, well, enough of that. It's a masterpiece of a poem, a worthy winner. We love it. Thank you, Cheryl Corrie. And thank you, Joe, for that reading. You did not let me down. Do we think my son was okay? Everyone, was he okay? Yeah, thumbs up. Okay.
I see you, Michael. I see you waving your hand like a seesaw.
Oh, Michael Pietrack, the great Michael Pietrack, is with us. So more about Michael Pietrack anon. Now, we come to somebody who it's very difficult to upstage, a natural born comic, a natural born performer, so handsome, debonair, photogenic. He even appears on the journals of the Society of Classical Poets. I mean, irrepressible, young, good looking, bearded, a Don Juan of the modern contemporary American world. And I am, of course, talking about Andrew Benson Brown. Welcome to joining us, Andrew. And according to himself, he was a graduate student at George Mason University. Before taking too many classes outside his discipline, they coincided with the reality of debt. He, in his spare time, reads obscure classics, writes things of little market value, and exercises far more than is befitting for a modern intellectual. He is also currently editor for Bard Owl Publishing and is carving out a career for himself in professional writing of various sorts. He is also a fabulous, fabulous poet. I love his book, Legends of Liberty, which is about the American War of Independence. If you've not read it, it's a worthy successor to Byron's Don Juan. It's an absolute, his rhyming ability. He could run a masterclass in rhyming. He's got some rhymes in that, which I've never seen anywhere. And I've read a hell of a lot of things. So they are great. So in this case, we actually have Benson Brown reading his own poem, which was a winning poem in the competition called Hymn to Aurora. So notice again, the classical theme. So Andrew, welcome.
Welcome. Yes, you're far too kind, James. I should, a caveat there, this poem was, I think I submitted it after the competition was over. So I think it was my Glastonbury poem that was the same place winner, not this one, but just, you know.
So the Glastonbury was the winning poem, but actually because of I was looking for a thematically linked one, I chose this one instead. So forgive me, I stand corrected. However, it's still a wonderful poem. Could you tell us about the form?
Okay, it's in tetrameter couplets, which, you know, is about as simple as you get almost. I don't know if there were really many challenges to the form. I mean, it's a little, you have to squish a bit more meaning into it than a pentameter line. But on the other hand, sometimes with a pentameter line, you got to work a little hard to push out the line. I didn't really find it. I felt like actually I wrote it pretty quickly. There weren't many challenges. I would say though that, you know, there's a lot of the mythological references and imagery can, maybe you have a risk of falling into obscurity where the reader's interpretation is concerned. But
okay then, well, you've almost run out of steam there, so let me relieve you of your misery of answering my questions, and let's get on with the poem, shall we? Ladies and gentlemen, the great Andrew Benson Brown from Missouri speaks.
Aurora, rise and cast your curls of daybreak through the vapor swirls to drape my face in scarlet beams. Since you left me, I've had bad dreams. Like waves, my sheets have tossed and turned. I've waxed and waned. I've dripped and burned. My patience tapered to a nub as the sneering moon reflects your snub. So fly, red Mustang, engine purring, from 0 to 100 spurring. Follow each starry highway sign. Depart your bed and enter mine. Uranus kindly will revive you. When you get here, I'm sure to drive you. You aren't like other green-eyed gods. Your coyness goes against the odds. I see your blushing cheeks, two clouds illumined by vermilion crowds of rays, each one a dainty thread of hair upon your tousled head that sets the firmament on fire. Those strings that weave through heaven's lyre beckon a hand to fill their gaps, but is mine skilled enough? Perhaps I'll lower my gaze to comb the grass and play in brooks of crystal glass. And if that makes you slightly jealous, you'll render my devotion zealous. Daughter of air, what do you know? You're always changing. Do you grow? Your locks are fresh, a golden trove, like Venus in her wooded grove mid primavera's lusty frolic. Have you a hint of the bucolic? I'd pick your orange from its bough. Your fruits been seedless seems, till now. I'd pluck your petals from their stem, since no bees pollinated them. I'd metamorphose you in mud and turn you to a leafy bud, then climb you like some viney thing. Too bad, you're nothing like the spring. The birds, like bards, are morning's wards. Both praise your light with vocal cords. We minstrels, though, use words for wings and float like gods on stage with strings. We can't, like condors, see you close, such majesty, so grandiose. Here far below I sit in dirt, grimy of face and grimy of shirt. And yet, across the sky you arc, and strolling ever nearer park above my head, and kiss my brow, a burning kiss. And then you bow and pass me by into the west, and fall back into bed and rest. Contrasted with your blinding form, I'm like Tithonus, old and worn. So keep me locked in your dark room, all gray and shrivel in the gloom, beyond the ocean, past the earth. One crack, one peak would make it worth my while. That warmth that feels the touch of your transparent tresses. Such are wishes. When you see the thunder god, don't repeat that greedy blunder to live forever. Give me youth instead, and crown my old sweet tooth. Not fixed so endless aches are thronging, just long enough to tempt your longing. Your amber car enticed Troy's air, then left his city bright and fair, dancing in amber flames. A warning, that mortal dares to love the morning whom crickets chirp for in the grave. Still, let me worship you, a slave to your routines. I offer up those joys I save for Bacchus' cup. In lieu of wine, I'll drink your lips and suck your spreading fingertips and drown in dawn your vintage blooming. Forgive me, goddess, for presuming. What this hymn lacks in piety, it offsets with sobriety. The night is tired, the heavens drear. It's almost time. Your birthday's near. I know, that's every day. The sky is special though in May. You'll start a different voyage soon. This time you won't pass by to zoom across the earth. This time you'll stay. And shining always, never stray. Let's stop the dials, darling, please. Deluge the blue and red and freeze the tides and banish chilly Mars and hang in Venus's hot arms and linger low, no more to rise and dominate the spheres. The sky is not big enough to coexist in. It must be bled to have my tryst in.
Yes. Very, very sensual indeed, isn't it? Actually, great, great stuff. Very, very sensual. Andrew, do you have a favorite line in all of that?
Well, probably the last one. Polysyllabic
Yes.
rhymes, you know.
Another coexisting Tristan, all those ingenious rhymes of yours. I tell you, my favorite line actually is I like the opening line of the fourth section. The birds like bards are morning's wards. Isn't that It's got the birds like bards. It's got that consonantal, and then rhyming, internal rhyming thing. The whole thing just flows so wonderfully. And then, having talked of bards, you then go on about being we minstrels instead of poets. I thought that's another, just a perfect word instead of a poet. So thank you so much. That's a wonderful,
my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Poem. So now we've had 3 poems that were winning poems in the SCP competition. We now come to the actual outright winner itself for the whole year, which was Jim Tweedie, or James A. Tweedie's poem. And before I sort of tell you about Jim Tweedie, I just have to say, I mean, it's almost the title itself I found absolutely riveting. The title of the poem is Contemplating Aristotle, Contemplating a Bust of Homer. Sort of kind of like a double take of classicism, and this has got to be the ultimate classical poem. Contemplating Aristotle, Contemplating a Bust of Homer. So Jim is a retired pastor living in Long Beach, Washington. He has written and published 6 novels, 1 collection of short stories, 3 collections of poetry, including mostly sonnets, all with the Dune Crest Press. His poems have appeared in lots and lots of places, so I don't need to go on about all of that, but certainly in the Society of Classical Poets. So welcome, Jim Tweedie. You are still with us, although you've taken off those incredibly cool shades that you were wearing at the beginning and that marvelous hat. I thought you looked like the coolest dude on the planet for a moment. You don't now. You just look like a retired pastor living in Long Beach, Washington. How are you?
Well, thank you, Jim. I'm James. I'm right now. We stopped the car. I'm sitting on a turf of grass in the middle of a parking lot in a resort up in Northwest Washington. And when I finish my poem, I'm going to get back in the car, and hopefully I can continue to enjoy the rest of the event. But that's where I am right now, and it's delighting to be a part of the event.
Well, that's marvelous. Well, tell us a little bit about the form of the poem first, Jim. Tell us about the form of this incredibly titled poem. The title itself is a striking, very striking title.
Well, it's made of 4 stanzas. Each of the stanza is in the form of what a Shakespearean sonnet closing sestet. So it has the rhyming scheme of the closing sestet of a Shakespearean sonnet, and there's 4 stanzas, each of the same form.
Marvelous. And actually, of course, in telling me that, of course, you give away, because the Shakespearean sestet bit, of course, you end up with a concluding sonnet, don't you? A concluding couplet, rather, and that gives a wonderful sense of finality to the movement of the verse.
Exactly. Each stanza represents a different part of the theme. Yes. And closes with a summary, and that happens 4 times.
Okay, so what were the challenges in writing this, Jim?
Well, the challenges here, I'll show you. I think you might, can you see that at all?
I can see that, just about.
It's an ekphrastic poem. That is the poem by Rembrandt of Aristotle, Contemplating a Bust of Homer. So, poem.
Right.
The poem it started out as a sonnet, but it could not sustain itself. So there's 4 themes I had to cover in that painting. One is the painting itself. An ekphrastic description of the poem is the first stanza, including the setting of which that painting was made. The second, I have to give acknowledgement to the painter. So the second stanza focuses primarily on the theme of the painting as represented by Rembrandt himself. Then there's the character of Aristotle, who needs to be identified. So the third stanza focuses on a description of Aristotle, and the closing stanza includes reference to the specific poetry of the Iliad and the Odyssey of Homer, but also turns the theme into how it is relevant to ourselves today. So it was somewhat complex to cover all of those areas.
Well, it's a fabulous poem, John, and I get you to read it in a minute, but I've got to say, some skills you never lose, do you? And I don't just mean poetry skills. I mean, you know what? This would make a fabulous sermon. I love the structure of it. It's just great, man. Have you ever done sermons? It's brilliant. I love that kind of structure. It's really great. It's sort of, you get the message and you give it to them and you give it to them again. So, Jim Tweedie, let's hear your reading of this wonderful overall winning poem for the SCP for 2022. Give it to us now.
Here we go. He stands enwrapped in luminous shadowed light, a woven cord of gold across his chest. Voluminous silk sleeves of purest white contrast the deep black velvet of his vest. Arrayed as though he were a wealthy man, a citizen of Rembrandt's Amsterdam. An Aristotle lost in time and space. The Netherlands reborn as ancient Greece, the past as present, brush stroked into place, an artist's metaphoric masterpiece. As time stands still, the sage's eyes embrace the enigmatic stone-blind Homer's face. The famed philosopher and polymath of all that is and was and yet shall be, now walks his thoughts down a mimetic path that leads to music, art, and poetry, and lays his hand of blessing on the head of one whose words yet live, though he be dead. Like Aristotle, we look to the past and see Achilles on the fields of Troy, and from that tragic tale return at last to home, a wife's long-suffering love and joy. We place the bust of Homer on our shelves and deem him greater than we deem ourselves.
Oh. Fabulous, fabulous, fabulous. What's your favorite line, Jim?
Well, I'll reference three. One, just simply using the word mimetic was a sheer joy,
Yeah.
in reference to Aristotle's poetics. The second was the stone blind Homer's face, which is a
That is
reference.
my favorite line. The enigmatic stone blind Homer's face. And you read that so well, it kind of like almost like solidified as you got to the end of the line.
It's a double entendre because it refers both to the stone bust, but also to his stone blindness.
Yes, yes.
My favorite, though, is the opening line, which I find captures my understanding of the art of Rembrandt himself, of so many of his paintings. He stands enwrapped in luminous, shadowed light. Mm. And I think that captures the general feature central feature, identifying feature of Rembrandt's portraiture, particularly luminous shadowed light. And I love that phrase.
It is a lovely phrase, but the trouble with it being the best line, Jim, is that the rest of it is it goes downhill afterwards. So I wouldn't say that is the best line. No, in fact, your last line is genius line, and deem him greater than we deem ourselves. That kind of emptying of the ego where we acknowledge other people's talents over and above ourselves, that is a genius line. So thank you so much for your reading, your thoughts. It's been absolutely lovely hearing you, because of course I've heard you before. So it's a treat having you again here with us. So you carry on with your trip, but tune in if you can. We don't want to lose you, if you know what I mean. Now, we've had the four poems from the SCP. Sorry? Yeah.
Thank you.
We've had the 4 poems from the SCP. We've now got the 4 poems that result from the Dante 100 competition. And Jillian Boba was the high school winner, the overall high school winner. And I've asked Evan to read this because, as you know, if you know anything about the Society of Classical Poets, you'll know that Evan is firstly, he's a teacher himself anyway, but he's deeply committed to promoting young people's work on the Society of Authors, and he's got a particular, and quite rightly so as well, because these people are the future. If we want to have a culture where real poetry is alive and well and being written, we've got to start with our young people. So Evan is a primary mover and shaker in this field, and so I asked him to read this poem, which he's going to do in a moment. But before he does, I asked Jillian, she couldn't be here tonight, and it's big thing to ask anyway, somebody at high school to come on and do this, but I'm not saying that's the reason she didn't, but she couldn't be here. But I asked her about herself, and she wrote the following. She said, I love this. I seriously love what she had to say. She said, I go to a classical education high school called Chesterton Academy, and we read the Divine Comedy as a junior literature class this fall. Every day we had Socratic style discussions on the cantos we read, and I enjoyed the Divine Comedy more than anything else I've ever read. What a person that is. My classmates and I consider ourselves Dante nerds. And even now, when we've moved on to reading Don Quixote, Shakespeare and Robert Bolt, we reference Dante all the time. As part of our grade for the semester, our headmaster literature teacher required us all to write and submit a poem for this contest, which is what led me to submitting my poem. So what a fantastic account of herself, and what a fantastic poem. So Evan, could I hand over to you? I don't have to introduce you, I don't think. I've said enough about you already so far. So, you know, you're the president, you're number one. Could you read Stars by Jillian Bober?
Sure. Okay, stars. First is a place full of darkness and sin. All souls here are caged by disordered desire. Lamenting and screaming create a vast din. Lucifer rules in this realm filled with mire. But though darkness tries, the light it can't bind. Even when you can't see them, the stars will still shine. Mountain looms high, it's a treacherous way. Every soul here seeks to be purified. None of them now in this place want to stay, desiring to enter the gate that's not wide. Higher you tread, seeking pure light to find. Though far out of reach, the stars will still shine. Reach the top of the mountain, the beauty reveals, invincible saints who for him are afire. Swiftly your wounds and scars all are healed, encountering the face of the end of desire. Standing this close, the light nearly blinds. While eternity reigns, the stars will still shine.
Thank you so much. Wonderful. And we'll just point out, we won't dwell here because we need to move on, but actual fact, the poem is also an acrostic, and the acrostic spells out fall, mend, rise. It's like 3 sections, just like the paradise, just like the Dante. Fall, mend, rise, the acrostic with the first letter of each line. Some lovely things in that poem, very lovely. So I particularly like the stars will still shine as a line. I just like that idea. So did you want to say anything yourself before we move on from that, Evan? Or are you happy to move on?
Just a great poem. I mean, that it was made by a high school student, you know, I think is amazing. So
amazing. Yeah.
Congratulations to Jillian Bober.
Congratulations, Jillian. And to describe yourself as a Dante nerd at high school, I think it's wonderful. Now we have the Gail, Kathleen Jardine Gail, who is the undergraduate and graduate winner. And she can't be here with us, and it's going to be read by my friend Michael Pietrack in a moment, who I'll introduce in a moment, a poem called Silver Fire. But I asked her to say a few things about her writing of it. So what did she have, this undergraduate, what did she have to say about the poem, the winning poem that she wrote? And she wrote the following. She said, although Dante had many interesting points, not that they all agree with my theology, so obviously has a very strong point of view, one of the images that left the most trace on me from the Divine Comedy was the ascent through purgatory. Incidentally, I almost think of portions of this life are part of some sort of a purgatory, though there may be the convenience of it all once. I appreciate imagery, sound, ways of gluing things together, an intense or carefully conversational voice. A teacher's dictate that one should make poetry rather than statements, craft not philosophy, reinforced my tendency to seek concentrated lines so that I could have an excuse to tell, since I've shown so much already. Now, though, I hope to find some other excuse to have both. I do want good lines, but this doesn't have to come from density, and sometimes the poem's pacing might deserve some lightness. And so in some poems I hope to write soon, I want to depict coming out of the forest with the light of a grassy hillside by decreasing the density of the line somewhat. So that's what she had to say about her writing of it. Now, my friend Michael Pietrack has agreed to read this poem. Michael Pietrack himself is not well known on the Society of Classical Poets, but I'm sure soon he will be. He is an incredible poet. I'm privileged to read his poem in draft called Legacy. There's a Facebook page for this, which has got some free downloads for people who want it, for the first 200 people, I think it is. So if you want to, it's called Legacy. I predict now that this poem, it's a fable. It's a fabulous fable. It's really a good and evil fable. It's a free will versus determinism fable. I predict this will become a animated film at some point. I think it's just so brilliantly done. So Michael Pietrack is really quite talented, but that's of no interest to you necessarily now. What is of interest is, can this guy deliver a poem? Well, he's appeared once before. He's got that kind of voice. I thought, I've heard this before. It's like, it's film talkovers. When you hear these film talkovers, these voices that do film talkovers, Michael Pietrack has got exactly that kind of voice. He's a fabulous reader. So no pressure, Michael, as I said to you last time, but we have Gail, Kathleen, Jardine's Silver Fire. Over to you.
Thank you, James. Silver Fire by Gail Kathleen Jardine. One staggers at the height. The first vast glance up slate gray peaks, a citadel of stone, uncleft by human hands. Then baser dread. Not even death makes this a place to stop. One must trudge on. So climb. Don't sink entrenched in the damnation of despair. Climb on until it's work that staggered you. But air, at least there's that. So much fresh air to gasp. Something brisk about walking without the cloak of conceit. Something tart in the sunlight. Is it cold or hot? Sharp, definitely. Living, life flaming itself clear of shame. May we be guided in this long ascent until our dust dissolves into the stars.
Oh, wow. Fabulous reading. Fabulous reading. Did you have a favorite line, Michael?
Yeah, the one that I think about a lot is climb on until it's work that staggered you.
Yeah, yes. Well, I know just how hard you work, so I can imagine just how much that resonates with you. You know, you're an unstoppable force, but, you know, eventually it gets to all of us. I, like myself, may we be guided in this long ascent until our dust dissolves into the stars. I love that. It's a wonderful poem. So thank you, Gail, Kathleen, Jardine, a worthy winning poem. Now, we come to the overall winner of the Dante 100 competition. So we had sub-winners, and then we had one overall winner. And myself and Professor Angela Alema O'Donnell, who was my co-judge with me, of whom I will say more in a moment, but actually we unanimously, without consulting each other, agreed on this particular poem by Nicholas Walz, called Papa's Commedia, as the winning poet. And we're privileged tonight to have Nicholas with us. And Nicholas is from Texas. He's only 19 years old. And I regard this as an astonishing feat. I mean, I actually think this is just absolutely an incredible performance for somebody who's 19 years old. And I do sincerely hope that Nicholas never gives up writing poetry. And the muse possesses him. And for the rest of his life, he is tuning into the muse and is going to actually produce the fruit of it all. I don't know what he wants to say himself, but he has told me he's currently studying classical philology and philosophy at the University of Dallas. The poets who have most influenced him are Gerald Manley Hopkins, more on that anon, Seamus Heaney, not so keen, Richard Wilbur, fine, and he would add Donne, Houseman, and of course Shakespeare to the list. But he thinks that Dante is one of the greatest minds to ever live. And he's absolutely right about that. So I won't say any more, but I will say to him as he's with us, could you tell us about the form of this poem, Nicholas?
Yeah, so it's a Shakespearean sonnet of sorts, because it doesn't exactly line up. There's a couple rhymes that are intentionally off, and it's not entirely iambic, also intentionally, but definitely very inspired and basically a Shakespearean sonnet. So I think that's the best way to look at it.
Oh, Nicholas, I love you. You know, sometimes there are not Evan, not Mark F. Stone, who's with us now as well, the great Mark F. Stone, and not Jim Tweedie, but there are just one or two pedants of the Society of Classical Poets who I sometimes write metrically off. I sometimes write rhymes that are off. You know, that's great to hear you deliberately doing it. You know, total regularity can sometimes be just a little bit too much sometimes. And sometimes it's right, but sometimes you need to be just a little bit off, don't you? You're a fellow spirit, Nicholas. I love it. So what were your challenges in writing this?
Definitely the diction. I just, there are moments, and I'm so happy it came together eventually, but where there's that word that you're just looking for. I don't know if you have the similar experience, just, you know, it's out there, to maybe to conclude a line.
I can tell you what, yeah, I mean, your word, for example, your wrist a glist. I had to really think about what the meaning of that word was. You've actually created a neologism, a brilliant one, because I'm assuming that is a glitter or a glistens. It's actually shining, and it's the shrapnel in the wrist. That's a wonderful use of language. Wonderful.
Yeah, so that word actually does exist. I did not make it up myself, but I mean, it's archaic, never used, and I was just mixing philology together to find that. And yes, that's a great example of a challenge. But
yeah, okay. Well, look, let's welcome you now to read this poem, because I've certainly got one or two more things to say about this I'd like to share with you. But just read the poem for us.
Papa's Commedia. That was hellish, the hulking chopper plunging through the top. The battered fuselage yawed, dipped and dove, while like a lunging weed eater, the stuttering feckless blade chawed the trees. There's no war, nor downed helicopter now. Your trim garden lies well kept and quiet, and he unworks with care your proud strained brow. With gentling hand he plucks out every lead. Oh, this will be bliss, your soldier's soul by Christ's word kissed, your lissom arms refleshed like his, your wrist aglist with shrapnel scars, while Christ, your God and gardener, takes you up as his. So rest, Christian, beneath his wings, speak core ad core, and be Papa then, 1,000,000 times more than before.
Oh, awesome performance. Awesome. What's your favorite line?
That's pretty hard, but going off what I was saying earlier, I would have to say the second line, finding the word yawed, was
yes, it's
really a joy for me. I just knew that word was out there, but I couldn't recall it for so long. And so when it finally came together, that was definitely a happy line.
Well, can I just point out something? There's so many beautiful things in this poem that you could write a 3,000 word essay on this. But I particularly like, it's really not one line, it's 4 lines, and I'll explain why you have to give the 4 lines. It's your soldier's soul by Christ's word kissed, your lissom arms refresh like his. By the way, lissom, of course, is straight out of Gerard Manley Hopkins. So, and it's just such a line from Hopkins. It's the Wedding March by Hopkins, I think. But your lissom arms refresh like his, your wrist aglist with shrapnel scars, while Christ, your God and gardener, takes you up as his. Now, what is so brilliant? I mean, God and gardener is a wonderful combination. It's absolutely straight out of John's Gospel. But your God and your gardener, you don't normally think of it in those terms. But what is so clever and Dantean is, of course, you've rhymed Christ with Christ and his, capital H, with his. And Christ and Dante, of course, refused to rhyme the word Christ with any other word than itself. So you've created a whole quatrain imitating Dante. Nah, very few people get that. It's actually really, and it works. But to avoid the boringness of Christ, Christ, Christ 4 times, you've got Christ, his. And you've kept that centrality of it. So I think that's theologically such a really ingenious thing. So for somebody who's 19, I mean, I'm sorry to patronize you. I'm 70, so I feel like I've earned it at my ripe old age. I can patronize people who are 19. Even my son, who's 28, who's here with us, he might say, yeah, he patronizes me too. I just can't stop myself. But, that is pretty amazing. So I think that is a well-deserved winning. And all the poems have been great, but that is from the Dante perspective, which is what this was about, that is particularly clever. So we come on to the last poem in the sequence. And here, sadly, I have to tell you, I was hoping to have Angela Alema O'Donnell, my co-judge, with me, to read one of her poems. She's a PhD, professor, poet, writer at Fordham University in New York City. She's had a biography of Flannery O'Connor. It was won a prize, a big prize, etc. She's had 7 collections of poetry out, and I'm going to read one of her poems. And the thing is, before I co-judge with her, I took the trouble of finding out what her poetry was like, because you know what it's like. You think, I'm going to co-judge poetry with somebody. What are they going to be like? And to be quite honest with you, as soon as I read this book, Still Pilgrim, I knew I was dealing with a major poet. This is absolutely a masterpiece of sonnets. It's just absolutely a masterpiece. Every one of them is brilliant. I'm now reading her Love in the Time of the Coronavirus. So, you know, I haven't got through that one yet, but I'm sure it'll be just the same. They are just absolutely technically brilliant poems. And so I'm privileged. She sent me some poems of hers. I'm going to read one of them that have not yet been published. And this poem is called Dante's Song. And it's got an epigraph to it from Purgatorio 2. And the epigraph is this: Dante speaks to a friend of his who has just died and has just come across to purgatory. If there's no new law that denies you memory or practice of the songs of love that used to quiet all my longings, then may it please you with those songs to solace my soul somewhat, for having journeyed here together with my body, it is weary. Love that discourses to me in my mind, he then began to sing, and sang so sweetly that I still hear that sweetest sound in me. So his friend is Casella, who's just died, and they were partners together. Commentators said they think Casella actually used to set some of Dante's early poems to music. And as he gets over to purgatory, they're about to do the climb, and he sings now in purgatory, and everyone, apart from one person, is entranced by this singing. So, and of course, what we are in purgatory too, we're just out of hell. We're just in this new realm. So here is a sonnet, and you'll notice it's in a octave, 8 lines, sestet format, where the first 8 lines deal with one topic, i.e. where he's come from, and the other 6 lines conclude it with where we're going. There are no poems in hell. There is no song. All sounds that soothe the mind forbidden there. No joy among the damned. No hope their wrongs might be righted. Beauty cures despair, and beauty cannot live among the lost. This another price the wicked pay. A fearful thing to weigh the endless cost against the pleasures of sin that last a day. But souls en route to God know how to sing. Their minds have not forgot the ordering of planets, suns, and stars. Music inheres in the vast universe and all its spheres. The saved souls cannot help but rejoice and celebrate the holy human voice. It's a wonderful poem, isn't it? Angela Alema O'Donnell, thank you so much for Dante's Song, which I think is a fitting conclusion to this. So that is the menu we have delivered, the 8 poems we've delivered. I see there are 9 things in the chat room, which I haven't had a chance to look at yet, so I'll try and do that. Are there any questions or comments that anybody wants to ask? While we're here, we have 5 minutes before we actually technically run out of time. So that's good time.
Question for Cynthia, she regarding the difference between the free verse version and the metered and rhymed version. She said she preferred the classical poetry version. Could you tell us why? What was the difference, I guess, between the two in your feeling or in your mind?
I'm not sure how to explain that. I just like the musical quality, I think, of the traditional verse. And I do like the fact that it looks like a poem and sounds more like a poem than something that might just be prose, like James said.
Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, I love the fact you say, oh, and it sounds like a poem. Yeah, that's exactly right, Cynthia. It sounds like a poem. If it sounds like a poem, it might be one. And if it doesn't sound like a poem, I'm going to take some persuading that it is a poem, to be quite honest. It's that important.
I like to think of poetry as a form of music.
It is a form of music. Let's remember that the fetus in the womb, what is it experiencing? It's feeling feelings, but it's hearing a sound. The sound is the sound of the mother's heart. The heartbeat is boom, boom. So auditory stuff affects our emotions far more profoundly in a way than visual stuff, which is why music is ubiquitous, why we all love it, because that man who's not moved by the sweet concord of sounds is fit for treason, stratagems, and spoils. Shakespeare, you know, if you can't feel music, you are pretty damn dead. So yeah, absolutely. So carry on. I think what Evan's trying to say to you is keep writing in form, okay? Give up the other stuff.
Thank you.
A question for Nicholas. Is that autobiographical? Did your father pass away?
My grandfather actually.
Grandfather.
But yes, it is autobiographical in that sense. So.
And I know, like with these Dante poems, it's kind of a knee-jerk reaction, or just a tendency to push on the stars because it's repeated so much at the end of, I think, each canto, right? Or each
Stars, yes.
Yeah, each of the 3 sections. And at the end, you don't go to the stars. There's kind of like this part where it's like millions of him. And I feel like you're getting at the stars though. Like, is there a connection there at the end to the stars?
Not necessarily consciously. I would say my biggest influence for that was a line from Hopkins, actually, again, from the Windhover, when it says, "A billion times told lovelier, more dangerous, so my chevalier." And so that's that sense of just this number of just expanding beauty. That I guess has my more direct influence there, but I think that's a valid interpretation too. So
actually, you saying about the Windhover, I mentioned the wedding thing from the Listen, but the other poem by Hopkins, the overall thing with words like yord and stuff like that, yord and chord, was Harry Plowman. I mean, it's the physicality of describing Harry Plowman in Hopkins' poem. You're not as extreme as him, but there's that sense of the sinewy language. The language, your language is very, very sinewy and expressive. It's very tight and compact. It's like a coiled spring. That's every word is trying to sort of jump out at you and speak. So that's is very impressive. I love Hopkins myself, and the danger with Hopkins, of course, is becoming like him. The real danger is you end up in this clone way. He takes over your poetry persona, and you can't write your own stuff because Yeats is the same. You end up in their style. So it's something you sometimes have to go through. You have to actually write loads of it in order to get rid of it, so you can find your own. But I think this poem is your own voice. I don't think it. You see, I saw the Hopkins bit. The Listen definitely is a Hopkins word. I hadn't seen that since I read Hopkins. But you haven't fallen into the trap of being that's another Hopkins clone poem. It's that's again you've got your own. There's other things there. So it's very good, very, very, very good indeed.
Yeah,
it's good to see you, Mark. Sorry,
I definitely went through that spell for sure of imitating Hopkins more than being inspired by him. So,
well, since you're only 19, you probably went through the spell when you were 14. I mean, you're making, you sort of like you obviously started very early. I was just about to say, Mark Stone, how good to have you with us. You've been a reader a couple of times, I think, on this for me, and I'm sorry you weren't here today as well. But I always enjoy your fact. How are you, Mark Stone?
Oh, I'm very fine. Am I unmuted? Yes.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, I'm doing very well. How are you, sir?
Oh, pretty, yeah, awesome. I've got to hold it in, Mark. There's a light inside me that I just have to keep, just like, otherwise if I'm unguarded, it just sort of bursts out. So I am in awesome form.
Excellent.
So that's really good. And I've got 2 people I don't know. I've got Mary. Who are you, Mary? Would you like to say a couple of words?
Yes, hi. I am a retired septuagenarian in Valparaiso, Florida, and I love poetry. And I've not been published, but I have a group here in our city that we all get together and recite each other our poetry to one another.
How did you hear about the SCP?
I was on the Epoch Times website. And
excellent.
there was a link and I went, oh, this is actual poetry.
Well, actually, you know, I could not have done this if I'd have tried to set these people up. Yesterday, a new article in the Epoch Times has appeared to me about the existence of hell. So if you're interested in hell, I have got a new article fresh up yesterday, and it's already had 35 comments on it, from ranging from very sane people to complete lunatics. So my article on hell has just appeared on the Epoch Times yesterday. So do check me out. Do tell your friends in your poetry writing group to contact Evan, submit their work, become part of the community. You're really welcome. And the other person I don't know is Diane. Who is Diane?
I'm Diane. I'm from Williamsport, Pennsylvania. I'm primarily a singer-songwriter, and poetry follows suit, although it's different. It's a different art. And I've only been writing for about 3 years. And I found the Society of Classical Poets probably just by a search, because I don't prefer free verse or the poetry that's popular today at all. It doesn't speak to me. So I went on a search, and that's how I found.
That's fabulous news. Well, I've got some very good news for you, Diane. You know, actually, Evan's wife, Katie, is also a singer-songwriter. She's a fabulous singer-songwriter. So, you know, get in touch with Evan and get connected. They're on LinkedIn, they're on Facebook, you know, start extending this and join this huge family that's going forward for standards, for quality, for classicism, for formal stuff, and for all the beauty that this actually produces. We want more beauty in our lives. And this is what this, I mean, hasn't tonight been fabulous? The poems, haven't they been great?
Yeah.
Absolutely great poems. It's, you know, I'm glad I don't have to judge between them anymore. I mean, they're all wonderful poems. So I think I better end now and say to you, thank you for attending. Do pass on the word to other people about the Society of Classical Poets. I want to thank Evan especially. He's enabled me to host this for you, and he's done so much work behind the scenes. I just can't, you know, thank him enough. He's an absolutely great guy. And as he says himself now, millions of people are now visiting the SCP site every year. It's genuinely becoming a phenomenon. I mean, it won't be surprising to him or to me if they don't shut it down soon. I mean, it's, you know, really, I mean, this is far too controversial, far too anti-woke to actually be allowed to carry on. So, don't, in fact, he'll probably be arrested soon. You know, he'll probably be arrested, you know. I won't mention names, because I don't want to upset people politically, but somebody from the government will be round to arrest Evan Mantyk. Fortunately, I'm in England, so I'll be all right for a while. But, you know, what happens in America, England follows. So so thank you all so much. It's been absolutely wonderful. Oh, Maria Landis, actually, there's no picture. Who is Maria? Moria. Not sure how to pronounce that. There's a third person. Are you there, Maria?
He has a message here. It says, thank you, James, for hosting. And thanks to all who wrote and read these lovely works. I'm officially a new SCP fan. Moria Roxburgh in Northeast Ohio, it looks like.
He can't unmute. Okay. He also loves GM Hopkins, and he also writes poetry. Well, submit your poetry, Moria, to Evan Mantyk at the Society of Classical Poets. We need more great poets. Actually, I can say as my final words before I go, because actually I feel like now that I'm developing a compulsion to keep speaking. I'll be here for another 3 hours. But I can say, you know, on the Society of Classical Poets, there are truly, I mean, there's a whole range of people, from newbies, people who just started writing, to actually, I think they've got at least half a dozen really great poets writing, you know, really good people. So there's so much to learn. There's so much debate going on. There's so much feedback happening. If you love this stuff, you really got to turn up and participate. So thank you all for being here. It's been really wonderful. I've really enjoyed talking to you all. Thank you again, Evan, for what you've done. I am going to leave this now, and I think I've earned a well-deserved cup of tea. I think I'm English. I think stuff the coffee. I think it's a cup of tea for me, and I'm going to have one now with my wife. So how about that? Okay. See you again soon, Joe. Won't be long. We'll meet up in Winchester. See everybody.
Thank you,
I would have been in New York again after 2019. I'm looking forward to performing again in New York with my mate Evan Mantyk and the team. Okay. Meet me in New York someday soon. God bless you all. Bye for now.
Thank you, James.
Bye.
Take care.